They laughed. They whispered. They called him Trash Man, and acted like he was invisible. But what they didn't know was that the black janitor they mocked every single day held the key to their futures. Because underneath that uniform was the owner's signature on every paycheck they'd ever cashed. Mondays were always the worst at Silvergate Tech. Not because of the workload, not because of the endless meetings, but because of how people acted, like stress gave them permission to treat others like dirt. And no one knew that better than Harold Jennings, the quiet, soft-spoken janitor who mopped the marble floors every morning by 6 a.m., scrubbed the breakroom counters, and took out bags full of half-eaten salads and overpriced coffee cups with employees' names scribbled in Sharpie. Harold was 61 years old, wiry, with a back bent slightly from years of physical labor, deep lines around his eyes, and graying hair tied into a short ponytail tucked under his cap. He barely spoke unless spoken to. He always wore the same uniform, dark blue coveralls with a name tag that simply read, Harold. Most of the office ignored him. A few offered obligatory nods. And then there were the ones who mocked him outright. Chad, the sales manager in his mid-30s with gelled hair and fake bravado, made a game of tossing his empty Starbucks cup inches away from the trash can just so Harold would have to pick it up. Brittany, the front desk assistant with the loud laugh and mean streak, loved posting secret photos of Harold mopping floors on her private Instagram with captions like, rags to still rags. Even worse was Darren, the junior VP who referred to Harold as Hurricane Mop, behind his back. Every morning Harold entered the building with the same quiet grace, pushing his cart through the glass doors while executives swept past him in tailored suits, talking about quarterly growth and weekend getaways. No one ever asked Harold how his weekend was. No one ever thanked him for keeping the office spotless. And yet Harold showed up on time. Every day. Without fail. Without complaint. What they didn't know was that Harold wasn't just a janitor. He was watching. Listening. Taking notes. And he had secrets none of them could even begin to imagine. It all started one Tuesday when Silvergate Tech CEO, Everett Kingsley, mysteriously resigned without explanation. No press release. No farewell party. Just gone. The office buzzed with speculation. Rumors swirled about lawsuits, offshore accounts, a midlife crisis. Nobody really knew. But within days the board announced a confidential buyout, saying the company had been acquired by a private party, who wished to remain anonymous for now. Most employees didn't care. As long as their paychecks cleared and free bagels still showed up on Fridays, no one asked questions. But Harold knew. Because the truth was, he was the buyer. Yes, Harold Jennings, the quiet janitor everyone treated like furniture, had just purchased 100% of Silvergate Tech for a cool $82 million. It wasn't a fluke. It was decades in the making. You see, Harold hadn't always been a janitor. He once ran a tech startup in the late 90s that got acquired by a massive conglomerate. He'd been a silent investor in several early fintech companies, including one that got acquired by PayPal. And while others were flashing wealth and chasing clout, Harold was stacking real estate, collecting dividends and living well below his means. When Everett's reckless spending and HR scandals threatened to tank Silvergate, Harold swooped in quietly, through a trust, using lawyers, keeping everything under wraps. Why? Because he wanted to see the truth. He wanted to know who deserved a second chance, and who needed a wake-up call. And the way his so-called co-workers treated him told him everything he needed to know. On that Tuesday something strange happened. A new directive came from corporate. Every department head had to submit internal reviews on team culture and identify any toxic behavior among staff. It seemed random, unrelated to the acquisition. But it wasn't. Chad rolled his eyes. More corporate nonsense, he muttered, tossing another coffee cup on the ground near Harold's mop bucket. Let's see what the janitor thinks about our culture. Brittany smirked. Can't wait for him to tell HR how we're too mean with our coffee stains. Harold said nothing. He just kept mopping. But he noticed. Every insult. Every smirk. Every opportunity for kindness that was passed over. He wrote it all down that night in a leather-bound notebook. What they didn't know was that Harold had already begun assembling a list. A private, detailed record of every employee in the building. Who showed kindness. Who didn't. Who cheated their coworkers. Who harassed interns. Who treated him like invisible dirt. And who treated him like a human being. One person who always stood out was Maya Patel, a shy intern who brought him coffee every Friday. One sugar, no cream, "Just how you like it, right, Mr. Harold?" she'd say with a small smile. He'd nod and thank her every time. She didn't know who he was either. But kindness doesn't require an audience. Maya's name was at the top of his list. So was Lawrence, the night guard who once helped Harold lift a broken vending machine without being asked. Meanwhile, Darren, Brittany, Chat. Their names were in the other notebook. 2 weeks later, the company-wide email went out. Announcement: a new executive transition will be revealed during Friday's all-hands meeting. Attendance is mandatory. That Friday, employees filed into the conference room, curious and annoyed. Some joked about getting a new CEO. Others bet it would be another rich guy with a yacht and a god complex. But when the lights dimmed and the projector fired up, what they saw shocked them. A video played. First, it showed hidden camera footage, silent clips of employees at the office. One by one, scenes of toxic behavior appeared. Chad smirking as he made Harold pick up his cup. Brittany mocking his clothes to a coworker. Darren boasting in the break room, "Honestly, I don't know why we pay janitors more than minimum wage. They should be grateful they're even employed." The room went ice cold. Then the screen flashed. Sometimes the people you look down on are the ones who see the most. A final image appeared, Harold, standing in the corner of the office, mop in hand, eyes focused. Then the screen faded to black. Everyone stared. Dead silence. Then came footsteps. Slow. Purposeful. From the side door, Harold Jennings entered. But this time he wasn't in janitor gear. He wore a sleek, custom-tailored navy blue suit. His posture was straight. His face was calm. He walked to the podium and adjusted the mic. Chad's mouth hung open. Brittany's face drained of color. Darren swallowed hard. "Good morning," Harold said calmly. "My name is Harold Jennings. And I'm the new owner of Silvergate Tech. You could have heard a pin drop. Some of you know me as the janitor. But what you didn't know is that I've been watching. Not in anger. Not for revenge. But for clarity." He paused, letting the silence settle. "When I bought this company, I wanted to understand its soul. Not the profits. Not the reports. The people. And now, I know who you are." He reached into his folder and pulled out 2 lists. This list, he held up a blue sheet, contains the names of employees who've shown kindness, integrity, and empathy, regardless of title or status. They will be receiving promotions, bonuses, and leadership training effective immediately. Gasps filled the room. Maya Patel covered her mouth in disbelief. This other list, he held up a red sheet, includes individuals whose behavior, if left unchecked, could poison this company's future. Chad shifted in his chair. Brittany was shaking. "Some of you will be asked to leave," Harold said flatly. "Others will be offered one chance to change, with mentorship, oversight, and accountability. That choice will be yours. But understand this, those days of cruelty cloaked in corporate culture? They end now." Just then, a voice from the back of the room shouted, "You can't be serious. You're a janitor." All heads turned. It was Darren. "This is insane. You manipulated everyone." Harold turned slowly. "No, Mr. Wexler. I observed everyone. And what I saw was who you really are." Darren stood up, red-faced. "You don't have the right." But before he could finish, 2 security guards entered from the hallway. The room froze. "Mr. Wexler," one of them said, "you've been asked to leave the premises. Your termination package will be emailed to you." Gasp. Darren stared at Harold, stunned. "You're making a huge mistake," he barked. "You'll regret this." Harold didn't flinch. "No, sir. What I regret is that I had to become invisible just to learn the truth." Darren stormed out. As the door slammed behind him, Harold turned back to the room. "Let this be a beginning. Not a punishment. The days ahead will test us. But kindness will be the new currency of this company. And those who lead with it will rise." The employees sat in stunned silence, processing every word, every decision, every moment they'd overlooked the man who had now reshaped their lives. But just as Harold was about to finish his speech, his assistant hurried up the side aisle with a worried expression. She whispered something into Harold's ear. His face darkened slightly. "Everyone, I have to step away briefly," he said calmly. "But please remain here. There's something I didn't anticipate." He turned, walked out of the room, and disappeared through the double doors. What he found on the other side would change everything. Because someone from his past had just returned, Someone who knew the real reason Harold walked away from tech in the first place, and they weren't here for a reunion. They were here to destroy everything he'd rebuilt. As Harold stepped through the double doors, his jaw clenched. His polished shoes echoed across the marble floor as his assistant trailed behind him. "He's waiting in the executive conference room," she said nervously. "He insisted on seeing you personally. Said he was an old friend." Harold didn't respond. He knew exactly who it was. The name she'd whispered to him moments ago, Calhoun Morgan. That name hadn't crossed his mind in over 20 years. And now, like a ghost from a graveyard of betrayal, it was back to haunt him. Calhoun had been Harold's original business partner in the late 90s, back when they launched an ambitious tech platform together. Two brilliant minds, one black, one white, trying to break into Silicon Valley. But while Harold focused on code, vision, and ethics, Calhoun had focused on money, manipulation, and backroom deals. And when their startup got traction, it was Calhoun who secretly sold the tech to a rival firm behind Harold's back, cutting him out of the millions they were owed. Calhoun's betrayal was the reason Harold walked away from tech. The reason he never chased the limelight. The reason he vowed that when he returned, it would be on his terms. And now, that same man had the nerve to walk into Harold's company unannounced. When Harold pushed open the door to the conference room, Calhoun stood there in a beige designer suit, leaning smugly against the polished table like he owned the place. "Harold," he grinned, arms wide. "Long time no see, old friend." Harold didn't move. "We're not friends," he said flatly. Calhoun chuckled, unfazed. "Fair enough. But I figured with all your recent success, maybe it's time we talk business again. Reunite the dream team, huh?" Harold stared him down. "You stole everything from me. And now you show up here after I spent 2 decades building my life back. Why?" Calhoun shrugged, as if betrayal were a misunderstanding. "Come on, man. We were young. Ruthless. That's how the game works. I just played it better." "You lied," Harold said coldly. "And you destroyed people's lives. Not just mine." Calhoun's smile faded slightly, but he kept his salesman tone. "Look, I'll be honest. I didn't come here just to reminisce. I want in on Silvergate. Word on the street is you acquired the company after Everett's fall. I also know that his exit wasn't as clean as the board claims." Harold's eyes narrowed. "You don't know anything." "Oh, I know plenty," Calhoun said. "See, Everett? He and I did business. Bad business. You may have bought his shares, Harold, but his mess is still tied to this company. And if I wanted to make things difficult, I could leak some documents, call in some favors. Investors get scared. Stock drops. And suddenly your grand janitor becomes king, story ends in lawsuits and PR hell." Harold stepped closer. "So this is extortion?" Calhoun smirked. "Call it negotiation. I want 25% stake. Silent partner. You run the place, I get my share. And in return, I keep my mouth shut. Everyone wins." Harold stared at him, heart thudding. For a moment, the silence was thick. But then Harold did something Calhoun didn't expect. He smiled. "You haven't changed a bit," Harold said. "Still playing with fire, thinking you're immune to the burn." Calhoun's eyes flickered. "So, we got a deal or what?" "No," Harold said, his voice low and powerful. "We don't. And if you think for 1 second I'm scared of your threats, then you've forgotten who I am." Calhoun raised an eyebrow. "You think you can handle a scandal?" "I think," Harold replied, "that I have a lot more friends than I used to. And this time? You're not the smartest man in the room." Calhoun scoffed. "Fine. Then let's see how long your little empire lasts without a real businessman behind the wheel." And with that he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Harold stood in the silence, chest tight, memories swirling. He knew Calhoun would strike back, he always did. But Harold also knew something else. He wasn't alone anymore. Because what he'd done in that office wasn't just clean floors, it was clean slates. And the people who did believe in kindness? They were ready to rise. Back in the main conference room, Maya was helping an older employee process what had just happened. Chad sat in stunned silence. Brittany hadn't spoken since Harold's reveal. The energy had shifted. Something real had changed. When Harold returned, he addressed the room once more. "Thank you for your patience. Some outside interference won't stop our vision. But I want to say this, what we do now matters more than what we've done before. Then, to everyone's shock, Harold invited employees to speak. "Tell me what you want Silvergate to become," he said. "This company isn't just mine. It's ours. If we build it together, we can set a new standard for what business looks like." Hands slowly went up. One by one voices joined. Lawrence, the night guard, suggested a mentorship program for hourly workers. Maya proposed adding mental health support for interns. Even quiet employees previously overlooked began to contribute. The room felt alive with purpose. But the peace was short-lived. Because the next morning, chaos erupted. Anonymous emails flooded investor inboxes. Accusations. Leaked files. Alleged connections between Harold and Everett's shady dealings. News outlets began calling. Headlines blared, "Who really owns Silvergate Tech? From janitor to CEO, or just a cover-up?" The board was shaken. Stock prices dipped. Harold sat in his office, breathing slowly, scanning the flood of media alerts. Calhoun had made his move. And the worst part? Some of the leaked documents were real. Not because Harold was guilty, but because Everett was, and Harold had taken ownership before the skeletons were cleared. Now Harold had to choose: go public and risk backlash? Or stay silent and let the wolves devour him? Meanwhile, back in the office, Brittany saw the headlines and smirked. "Told you he was shady," she whispered to Chad. "We should have never trusted a janitor to run a company." But what she didn't know was that Maya had overheard her. And this time, Maya wasn't staying quiet. She marched straight to Harold's office and asked for 5 minutes. He nodded. "Mr. Jennings," she said carefully, "I believe in you. And I think you need someone on your team who knows social media, understands Gen Z narratives, and can get ahead of these lies. Let me help." Harold looked at her, really looked at her. Then smiled. "You may be young," he said, "but you've got more courage than people twice your age. Let's do it." That afternoon, Maya posted a video across Silvergate's official channels. It showed Harold, not as a janitor or a CEO but as a man. Honest, brave, transparent. He explained how he acquired the company, what he saw in the people, why kindness mattered more than clout. And he addressed the leaks directly. "I inherited the mess, but I refuse to run from it. We will clean house, with truth, with transparency, and with justice." The video went viral. Support poured in. "Finally, a CEO with integrity," one comment read. "This man is what leadership looks like," another said. The tide was turning. But Calhoun wasn't finished. That evening, a limo pulled up outside Silvergate headquarters. Calhoun stepped out, flanked by lawyers. In his hand was a legal document, a lawsuit alleging that Harold's acquisition was fraudulent due to withheld liabilities. It was a blatant attack. And his plan was simple: tie Harold up in court, drain his funds, ruin his name. At 7 p.m., as employees were heading home, security intercepted Calhoun at the front desk. "I have every right to be here," he barked. "Tell your janitor-in-chief to come face me like a man." But before they could respond, the front doors opened, and Harold walked out, trench coat on, briefcase in hand. He stepped right up to Calhoun. "You really don't learn, do you?" Harold said quietly. "This lawsuit is nonsense." "We'll see," Calhoun smirked. "You bought this company with secrets. Now I'm exposing them." "You're not exposing anything but your own desperation," Harold replied. "You want attention. You want power. But I have something you'll never understand." "What's that?" Calhoun asked. Harold leaned in and said, "Respect. Not bought." Suddenly a voice cut through the air. "Actually, Mr. Morgan, you might want to hold off on filing that." Everyone turned. A tall black woman in a sharp suit stepped forward. "I'm attorney Denise Whitaker, general counsel for Silvergate. And I've reviewed your claim. We have evidence of your past deals with Everett, including 2 wire transfers under shell accounts you forgot to cover. You're not just baseless, you're exposed." Calhoun's face drained of color. "You don't want this smoke," Denise said calmly. "But if you do, we'll see you in court. Just know, Harold Jennings isn't alone this time." Calhoun hesitated, then turned and stormed off. Harold nodded at Denise. "Thank you." She smiled. "You built something worth protecting. I'm honored to fight for it." But as Harold walked back into the building, a new alert buzzed on his phone. A mysterious email. Subject line: "We know who you really are. Attached was a photo. A blurry image of Harold, decades ago, standing in front of a courthouse. It wasn't from the business world. It was from a sealed case he thought was long buried. One that could destroy everything if it came to light. Harold stared at the screen, heart pounding. Because this wasn't Calhoun's work. It was someone else. Someone watching. Someone who knew his deepest secret. And they had just made their first move. Harold sat alone in his office, the city skyline behind him glowing amber in the dusk. His eyes were locked on the photo on his screen. The image was grainy but unmistakable. It was him, just 19 years old, standing outside the courthouse in Atlanta, Georgia. His hands were cuffed. His face bruised. And next to him, a woman crying. The subject line of the email still glared on the screen. "We know who you really are." No name. No message. Just the image and the threat. Harold's throat tightened. That chapter of his life, the one he'd never spoken of to anyone at Silvergate, was coming back to haunt him. He could still hear the judge's voice echoing from decades ago. Possession with intent to distribute. 1 year in county jail. Probation to follow. Back then, Harold was just a kid caught in a broken system. Framed by a corrupt officer who planted a bag of pills in his backpack during a random stop and frisk. He had no money for a lawyer. His single mother, working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, had begged the public defender to fight. But instead, they pushed him to plead guilty for a lighter sentence. That mugshot followed him for years. Kept him out of schools. Out of jobs. Out of hope. That's when he picked up a mop. Not because it was all he was good for, but because it was the only door left open. And now someone wanted to use that against him. A knock at the door snapped Harold from the spiral. It was Maya. "Mr. Jennings," she said, eyes wide. "Something's going on." She handed him her phone. Silvergate's Twitter page was blowing up. A new anonymous account, @Truth on Harold, was circulating the same courthouse photo, claiming Harold had a criminal past and manipulated his way into power. The tweet already had thousands of retweets. Hashtags like #CriminalCEO and #JanitorFraud were trending. Some users defended Harold. Others didn't. But the story had escaped the building, and was now threatening everything. Maya looked shaken. "What should we do?" Harold stood slowly. "We tell the truth." An hour later, a press conference was held in the main atrium. Employees gathered. Cameras rolled. Reporters whispered. Harold stepped to the mic. His tailored suit couldn't hide the storm in his chest, but his voice was clear. "You've all seen the photo," he began. "Yes, it's real. I was arrested at 19. And no, I've never denied it. I didn't tell you because it wasn't who I am anymore. But since someone wants to weaponize my past, let me tell you the full story." The room fell silent. Harold didn't read from a script. He spoke from memory. From pain. From truth. "I grew up in South Atlanta. No father. A mother who worked herself into the ground to keep me fed. One night I was walking home when a cop pulled me aside. Said I fit the description. Next thing I knew, I was face down on the pavement and a bag of pills was in my pocket. I cried to my public defender. But they said the system didn't care. So I pled guilty, served time, and came out with a record that said I was dangerous." He paused. The room was holding its breath. "I spent years hiding. Cleaning buildings where people wouldn't even look me in the eye. But while I mopped, I listened. I learned. I read every book on programming I could find. Took online classes. Studied by streetlight. And I promised myself that if I ever got a second chance, I'd make it count. And here we are." His voice cracked slightly. "So yes, I was arrested. But that boy you see in the photo? He didn't disappear. He rose. He fought for every inch of this moment. And no smear campaign will take that away." When he stepped back from the mic, the room erupted, not with shock or scandal, but with applause. Denise stood proudly in the back. Maya wiped away tears. Even Lawrence the night guard gave a slow, firm nod. But not everyone was moved. In the far corner, Brittany muttered to Chad, "He's still a criminal. I don't care how he dresses it up." What she didn't notice was that HR Director Selena was standing just a few feet behind, hearing everything. The next morning, Harold called an emergency board meeting. "We've got a virus inside this company," he said. "Not in the code, in the culture. I gave people a chance to grow. Some did. Others? Still stuck in the mud." He pulled up audio, Brittany and Chad mocking employees, calling interns diversity hires, laughing about lying to clients. Then another clip, Brittany joking about throwing Maya under the bus if things got worse. The board sat frozen. Harold looked each one in the eye. I will not build a future on rot. By noon, Brittany and Chad were escorted out by security. As they passed Maya, she held her chin high. Funny how karma works, she whispered. But the storm hadn't passed. That afternoon, a breaking news alert hit every phone in the building. Silvergate's new CEO once convicted. Congress demands inquiry into government tech contracts. The past had opened the floodgates. Politicians began questioning Silvergate's deals. Rivals saw an opportunity to strike. Investors panicked. Some board members started to waver. Maybe we need a safer face at the top, one whispered. Maybe someone without baggage. Harold heard the whispers, felt the shift. And then, just when it seemed he might lose it all, someone unexpected stood up. It was Everett's daughter, Olivia, who had once stayed far from the company after her father's fall. She came into the next board meeting and asked to speak. I know my father failed this company, she said. But you all need to hear this. When my father stepped down, he told me something. He said Harold Jennings was the only man in this building who didn't flinch in the face of truth. That's why he handed over his shares. Not because Harold had the money, but because he had the integrity. She turned to the board. So if you're thinking of pushing him out, just know, you're replacing the best leader this company has ever had. A hush fell. Harold exhaled slowly. But before he could speak, the fire alarm rang. Then sirens. Not the company's. Police. Outside, flashing lights filled the parking lot. Harold rushed to the lobby. Officers swarmed in. Mr. Harold Jennings? One barked. You're under arrest for fraud, wire manipulation, and conspiracy to defraud shareholders. The crowd gasped. Maya screamed. What? No. This has to be a setup. Don't resist, the officer snapped, pulling Harold's hands behind his back. You have the right to remain silent. And just like that, Harold was dragged away, stunned and handcuffed, while the very company he owned watched in disbelief. Cameras rolled. Reporters shouted. Mr. Jennings? Is it true? Did you lie about your past? Is this the end of Silvergate Tech? As the police car doors slammed shut, Maya ran outside, tears in her eyes. We have to help him, she whispered. They're setting him up. I know it. Denise stepped forward, her voice trembling with fury. Then we start digging. Because if they're trying to erase this man again, they messed with the wrong team. Back at police headquarters, Harold sat in the interrogation room, cuffed to a metal table, heart racing. Across from him, a familiar smirk. Calhoun Morgan, again. Told you I'd ruin you, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Hope you enjoyed your little fantasy. Because the real world still belongs to people like me. Harold looked up, eyes burning, not with fear but with resolve. You made one mistake, he said through clenched teeth. You left too many witnesses. Calhoun frowned. What? And that's when the door swung open, and someone stepped in, a surprise ally who could change everything. The air inside the interrogation room was thick with tension. Calhoun Morgan leaned back, smug, convinced he'd won. But when the door opened, his smile faltered. Standing there, her posture firm and face unreadable, was District Attorney Rhonda Ellison, the first black woman elected to her post in the state and a known crusader against corruption in law enforcement and corporate abuse. This ends now, she said, placing a folder on the table between Harold and Calhoun. Calhoun straightened, suddenly less smug. D. Ellison, I don't believe you have jurisdiction. I have more than enough, she cut in coldly. You see, someone sent me a little gift last night. Anonymous Dropbox. Contained wire transfers, emails, and video footage, all linking you, Mr. Morgan, to the framing of Mr. Jennings, going back 30 years and as recent as last week. Calhoun's face went pale. Harold's eyes widened. You got the tapes? He asked, stunned. Not just the tapes, Rhonda said, sliding open the folder. Signed affidavits from 2 former Atlanta officers who've confessed they planted evidence in 1993. Turns out your drug bust was a trophy arrest, and someone paid them to make it stick. Harold's jaw clenched. You mean, yes, she nodded. The same firm that represented Calhoun's father back then? They also made your charges disappear from public record. in exchange for silence. But you weren't supposed to rise above it, Harold. You were supposed to stay quiet. Invisible. Calhoun stood suddenly. This is outrageous. I'm calling my lawyer. Do that, Rhonda said. But first you should know, based on what we found, a grand jury has already been impaneled. She turned to Harold. Mr. Jennings, you're free to go. The charges against you were fabricated using falsified evidence submitted by a private contractor with ties to your former board rival. The cuffs were removed. Harold rubbed his wrist slowly, stunned but grounded. Calhoun sputtered. You're going to regret this, Jennings. You think you've won, but this world doesn't belong to people like you. Harold stood slowly and looked him in the eye. Maybe it didn't, but it will. As Harold left the station, a crowd had formed. Media, supporters, employees, and protesters. Maya was there, holding up a sign, "We stand with Harold." Denise was at her side, along with Olivia, Everett's daughter, who had now publicly backed Harold as Silvergate's rightful leader. You okay? Maya asked, teary-eyed. Better than ever, Harold said. But we've got work to do. Back at Silvergate, a massive shift was already underway. A whistleblower within the company had leaked internal memos showing Calhoun had paid consultants to hack internal emails and doctor spreadsheets to frame Harold for embezzlement. The entire tech community was now watching. Clients were pulling out of Calhoun's side companies. Meanwhile, Harold's transparency and the courage of his confession had turned him into a national symbol of redemption and justice. But while the tide was turning, the storm wasn't over. Later that evening, Harold sat with Denise, Rhonda, and Maya in the war room of the company. We're going after Calhoun, Rhonda said. But if we want this to stick and protect Silvergate's reputation, we need to clean house entirely. Denise nodded. Agreed. Brittany and Chad may be gone, but we've still got board members who turned a blind eye. Who enabled this? And they could come for your seat next. Maya looked around the table. Then what do we do? Harold pulled out a file labeled Plan H. We fight smart. Tomorrow we call for an emergency shareholders vote to restructure the board. Every ally we have, investors, staff, department heads, they get a vote. No more power games behind closed doors. Let the company choose what kind of leadership it wants. And so it began. The next day, Silvergate Tech's central atrium was transformed into a voting center. Live-streamed globally, every employee, shareholder, and contractor was given a say. The candidates? Harold, running to continue as CEO and chair. And on the other side, a group backed by Calhoun's allies, fronted by a sleek but soulless finance exec named Dylan Marsh. The smear campaign kicked into high gear. Dylan's supporters claimed Harold's past made him unstable. They mocked his lack of Ivy League credentials. They claimed Silvergate needed polished leadership. Harold didn't clap back. Instead, he gave a speech that would later go viral. Standing beneath a massive banner that read, "Every voice matters," he said, "I know what it feels like to be told you're not enough. To be mocked, dismissed, swept aside. But I also know what it means to fight for every inch of progress. This company was built by people, not pedigrees. And if you let me, I'll keep building it, with you." The ballots rolled in over 12 tense hours. Investors waited. Employees argued in break rooms. Twitter exploded with hashtags like #StandWithHarold and #JanitorCEO. Finally, the results were announced. Harold Jennings, 67% of the vote. Dylan Marsh, 33%. The atrium erupted into cheers. Maya hugged Harold so tight he nearly fell over. Olivia wiped tears from her cheeks. Even security guards clapped. But the celebration was short-lived. Because just then, a Silvergate IT manager burst into the room with panic in his voice. "Mr. Jennings, we have a breach." "What kind of breach?" Harold asked. "A full data wipe attempt. Someone tried to erase every server tied to our financial records, HR files, contracts, everything. They used administrator-level access from an off-site IP. That's Calhoun," Maya said. "He's trying to destroy evidence before he's indicted." "Then we stop him," Denise said. Harold, Maya, and the IT team jumped into action. Within minutes, they traced the attack to a remote office building leased by one of Calhoun's shell companies. But the files were already vanishing, one by one. "If we don't block it in the next 5 minutes, we lose everything," the IT director shouted. "Backups. He's targeting those too." Maya slammed her fist on the desk. There has to be another way. Harold suddenly looked up. There is. But it's risky. He turned to the head of cyber. Remember the quantum AI project Everett started before he stepped down? The prototype encryption layer we shelved. You mean Project Atlas? Yeah. We built it to be unhackable. But we also gave it a failsafe. I want you to activate it right now. But it was never tested. I'm not asking, Harold said. Do it. The room held its breath as lines of code raced across the screens. Then, the servers froze. The delete protocol stalled. And slowly the files began to restore. The failsafe worked. For now. We've bought time, the IT lead said. But Calhoun knows we're coming. If he's willing to destroy the entire company to avoid prison, he's desperate. Just then Harold's phone buzzed. A private number. He answered. You don't know when to quit, do you? It was Calhoun. I tried to play fair. I gave you the warning shot. But now, I've got everything to lose. Harold stayed calm. You lost the minute you underestimated a janitor. Cute, Calhoun sneered. But this story doesn't end with you in a throne. It ends with fire. You think you're untouchable because you've got a few fans online? Let me tell you something, Harold. Some enemies don't use law firms. They use bullets. The line went dead. Harold stood frozen. Maya looked concerned. What is it? He's not bluffing, Harold said. He's going all in. And I have to finish this before someone gets hurt. He turned to Denise. Get Rhonda back on the line. We're going to bring him down. Not just legally. Publicly. Denise nodded. We go live. Live? Harold said. Tonight. As the sun set, the Silvergate Auditorium was transformed into a press theater. Cameras rolled. Reporters gathered. The nation tuned in. Harold stood at the podium one last time. 4 years, people like me weren't allowed to lead companies like this, he began. But I didn't rise just to sit in a corner office. I rose to change the room. He clicked a remote. Behind him, a giant screen lit up with files, footage, and evidence, everything Rhonda's team had gathered. These are the crimes of Calhoun Morgan. The lies. The fraud. The sabotage. And the threats made against not just me, but this entire company. He turned to the camera. To the DOJ watching this? I say, do your job. To those who supported me? Thank you. And to those who still doubt? I invite you to see what we're building, together. Thunderous applause followed. But just as Harold stepped off the stage, a commotion erupted near the side entrance. A security guard shouted, "Gun! He's got a gun!" People ducked. Screams echoed. And at the doorway, Calhoun Morgan, disheveled and wild-eyed, held a pistol, aiming straight at Harold. The room froze. Time slowed. Gasps turned into screams as Calhoun Morgan burst through the back of the auditorium, a pistol raised, sweat streaming down his face, eyes wild with desperation and hatred. "You ruined me, Harold," he shouted. "This was my company. Mine." Security surged forward, but Calhoun waved the gun, keeping them back. Harold Jennings stood still. Calm. Unshaken. He didn't run. Didn't duck. He stepped forward. "Put the gun down, Calhoun," Harold said firmly, voice steady but loud enough to command the room. "You've already lost everything that matters. Don't lose what's left of your soul, too." Calhoun's hand trembled. "You think you can stand there and act like some hero? You were nothing. A janitor. You don't get to take everything from me." Harold kept walking toward him. "I didn't take anything. You gave it all away, piece by piece, when you chose greed over decency. Hate over humanity. I fought for this company with everything I had. But not for power. For purpose." Calhoun's lip quivered. His hand shook harder. Then, bang. A shot echoed through the hall. Screams erupted again. But no one was hit. The bullet struck the wall, missing Harold by inches. A security officer tackled Calhoun to the ground in an instant, disarming him. The crowd rushed away in chaos, but Harold stood still, not flinching once. As Calhoun was cuffed, he kept yelling, "You'll regret this, Jennings. You'll never be one of them. You'll always be trash. Just a janitor." Harold looked down at him and said quietly, "Then I'll be the janitor who mopped up your mess." As police dragged Calhoun out, media swarmed the scene. Rhonda Ellison, the DA, arrived moments later, shaking her head. "He'll be facing federal time now. Weapons charge on top of corporate fraud. Attempted murder even if he missed. He's done. Maya hugged Harold tightly, eyes wet with emotion. You could have been killed. But I wasn't, Harold said softly. Because fear didn't win tonight. He didn't win. The nation had seen it all, the corruption, the takedown, and Harold's courage. Social media dubbed him the people's CEO. News outlets praised his integrity. And Silvergate Tech? Its stock soared. The board was restructured entirely with new seats filled by diverse voices from inside the company, workers, engineers, interns, and support staff. Real people. At a press event, Maya took the stage. For years we looked down on people based on job titles. On what car they drove. What school they went to. But we forgot that wisdom and strength come from struggle, and sometimes the janitor knows more about the company than the CEO. She then introduced Harold, who walked out wearing a navy blue suit, but with his old janitor's key ring clipped to his belt. I keep it to remind me, he said, of where I started. Of the floors I scrubbed. The nights I slept in stairwells. And the people I met along the way who taught me what real leadership means. The crowd gave him a standing ovation. I remember being 13 sitting outside a library I wasn't allowed in. Watching kids walk past me like I didn't matter. I promised myself that one day I'd build something where no one felt invisible. Where a kid from any background could dream big. That's what Silvergate means to me. And that's why I'm not done building yet. Calhoun sat in a prison cell looking at the newspaper headline, Black Janitor turns CEO named Man of the Year. He crumpled it and stared at the wall, knowing the world had changed, and left him behind. His father's empire? In ruins. Their companies audited. His name? Now synonymous with disgrace. He had power, and lost it all to the man he called beneath him. And in his silence he finally realized, it wasn't the world that betrayed him, it was his own pride. Harold walked through the campus that now bore his name, the Jennings Innovation Center. Students toured the labs. Interns of all races and backgrounds collaborated. No more mocking. No more hierarchy based on prejudice. In the cafeteria, he spotted Mrs. Reyes, the cleaning lady who once sat with him when no one else would. Still cleaning up after y'all? She said with a smirk. You built this place too, Harold said, smiling. People like you and me, we are the foundation. He handed her a gold badge, Director of Campus Services. She gasped. This is real. You earned it, he said. Maya's tech podcast, Mopped Up, became one of the top shows in the country. Her episode titled, How a Janitor Changed Everything broke records. She closed the segment with, Don't let the world define you by your worst day or your lowest job. Let your vision define you. Let your perseverance be your resume. Harold Jennings taught us that brilliance wears overalls, wisdom works night shifts, and the future is inclusive. In a quiet moment, Harold sat at his desk, writing a letter to be framed in the company lobby. To every kid who's ever been laughed at for dreaming too big. To every worker who's ever been ignored in the break room. To every janitor, waitress, bus driver, and warehouse employee. You matter. You are the reason this company stands today. This isn't just my story. It's ours. And we're just getting started. Signed, Harold Jennings, CEO Silvergate Tech, former janitor. So next time someone tells you who you're not, remember Harold Jennings? He swept floors by day, studied at night, survived injustice, endured humiliation, and rose to become a symbol of hope for millions. They mocked the black janitor. But in the end, he didn't just own the company. He changed the world. The end.